Enjoyed yesterday and had a very good day here in the Lloyd Center, transformed for our conference. When we're not doing this, we're roller skating and other things in here. So it's our all-purpose overflow room for the Street Trust. Thanks again for being here for the 2023 Oregon Active Transportation Summit, our annual gathering of public and active transportation advocates, professionals, community leaders, and decision makers. My name is Sarah Iannarone. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Street Trust and the Street Trust Action Fund. If you want to learn more about us, you can go to www.thestreettrust.org and join either one of those organizations to get involved. You know, we're working every day at the literal intersections of an ongoing transportation crisis. Our unsafe and incomplete public streets threaten lives and livelihoods of our neighbors every day. I am concerned that we may not be making progress that we need on the time frame that we need. And so we've thought carefully about the program this morning and invited people to share with you their passion for complete streets and their understanding of the ways that we can stop people from dying on our streets, especially since we know that these deaths are the result of inequality, lack safety, and even climate change. Much of our current transportation system was designed to perpetuate white supremacy. Indigenous communities carved transportation routes throughout the region that long predated our paved roads, and we acknowledge today that we live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapua, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. Many policies and projects that have proceeded without any care or consideration given to the impacts on communities of color continue to have ramifications today. The Street Trust recognizes this history and commits to using this knowledge to inform our policy decisions and our discussions here at the summit. I want to make a few updates for you before I introduce our speakers. There will be a second networking coffee starting at 10:30 to 11, and I will try to make sure that we get there on time today. There will be a lunch break from 12 to 1. I hope that you're enjoying the options here in the Lloyd Center in the Lloyd District neighborhood, but if you have any challenges, just let the staff know, and there are some snacks at the registration desk to carry you over. And we will have the same index cards model for submitting questions. So you'll see us circulating during the conversation after the keynote. If you want an index card, raise your hand. And if you need someone to transcribe a question for you, just raise your hand and we'll send a staff person or a volunteer over to write that question down for you. So without further ado, we are grateful to have Ryan Sharp, Director of Transportation and Parking for the City of Hoboken, here with us from New Jersey this morning to deliver your keynote. Afterwards, he'll sit down with Drew Van Hengel, Senior Principal at NelsonNygaard. She's also our beloved and talented Chair of the Board of Directors of the Street Trust. Drew has more than 20 years of academic and practical transportation planning and operations experience. She focuses on bicycle and pedestrian master planning and capital project development, project evaluation, healthy communities, and safe routes to schools and parks. But before we hear from them, I'm honored to introduce a champion for racial equity and transportation justice, and last year, Alice Award winner, Charlene McGee, who's manager at Multnomah County's Racial and Ethnic Approaches to Community Health REACH program. Charlene brings over 15 years of leadership working at the intersection of public health and healthcare systems to confront and change social determinants of health. She holds a bachelor's of science in public health, health promotion and education, with a minor in community health from Oregon State University. She is currently pursuing an executive master's in public administration at Portland State University. As a Liberian Oregonian, her experience as a survivor of the Liberian Civil War and Black immigrant heavily influenced her career in health equity, health policy, and program development. She works closely with community partners, including the Street Trust. We're so happy to partner with her in her REACH program efforts to elevate the lived experience and community wisdom in order to advocate for systems and policy improvements and culturally appropriate interventions to promote health. Charlene is going to ground us briefly in the local context this morning before she introduces and hands off the microphone to Ryan for his presentation. Thank you, Charlene, for being with us here this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm like the sun is out. um, so thank you, Sarah, for the intro. I was just like, oh, I have obtained my master's since then. So it was a process in the midst of COVID response. I'm always humbled by that accomplishment because I was ready to pause, but I didn't and kept going. So good morning. I currently serve as the interim director for our Prevention and Health Promotion Unit at Multnomah County Health Department, which includes our REACH program. Also included in that program are tobacco and our community adolescent health team, which includes violence prevention. And I sort of set that context around, this bucket of work, right? Chronic disease. Here in Multnomah County, when we look at the leading causes of death, it used to be 10, but now we have 11, with COVID being among the leading causes of death. 9 of those are chronic disease. For public health, right, we know that chronic disease are preventable. The built environment is a key indicator of health outcomes. We know where people live, play, worship, and shop have a major impact on health. So through our REACH program, we are in our second round of funding, just submitted a third application on April 11th. Part of that portfolio of work with the funding we have from CDC was to establish the baseline data for Multnomah County's Black and African immigrants around disparities in the right-of-way. What we found was alarming, what we found was startling, and honestly, as we have engaged our community, the community is not surprised by it, right? Community sees what happens every day, right? From the public health level, right, we have to see it when the data piles up and piles up. One of the things that CDC asks us to do with our funding is to promote and encourage the health benefits of active transportation. I remember when I first took on the run, I'm like, what does that even mean? And as I engage community asks that, right? Like, what does active transportation mean, right? And it's like walking, biking, and all the different ways to get to and from. What we hear from community repeatedly is that we know the health benefits of walking and biking, but it's not safe. I can't safely walk from my home to school. I cannot safely access everyday destination. I cannot safely get to, the nearest grocery store, right? You have to take public transportation. There are other within our community we know who are using rideshare, right, to get kids to and from school because of displacement and gentrification. We know here in Multnomah County, the impact of, displacement, right, have really pushed our community, ones who live in inner north and northeast Portland, where once they had more connection to sidewalks, where they could safely walk out into East County in the numbers, where there aren't sidewalks, right? Where we have community members who are pushing their babies in the strollers on gravel because they don't have sidewalks and they're literally trying to survive and get by. I think definitely from the public health perspective, we know that when individuals have places where they feel safe, we know people can thrive, but oftentimes that's not the case for multiple reasons, including racism, disinvestment. Honestly, I think sometimes through lack of political will, right, to make those hard decisions to make community feel safe. What I ask you to do as transportation professionals, as planners, as engineers, is to really leverage your power to make a difference, leverage your power honestly to save lives. When we do this work, one thing that's never lost, let me back up for a little bit. When we started to we did the data analysis, right? Because that's like the public health thing you have to do. And we started to engage the community on how do we even communicate this work. And honestly, I will say it was definitely one of those hard moments in my profession that I didn't anticipate, but it was also a great moment of learning and growth. What we heard from the community was like, slow down, hold on. How are you talking about this. Why we got that pushback from the community? Because when we speak about Oregon and Multnomah County having these traffic fatalities, the numbers we're speaking about aren't just simply numbers. These are individuals, siblings, mother, loved ones, brother, sister, friend. What we also learned through our work was that while we were engaged in the community, there were also staff who also had survived traffic fatalities and injuries, that their loved one, right, were showing up in the data. So what we had to do literally was pause and stop and reorganize how we were going to relay the information. What we committed to as a program and as an organization was to acknowledge the traumatic impact of data sharing. And I say that to say, is to, remind you that as you go out to do your work, that the decisions you're making will impact someone's loved one, someone's brother, someone's sister. Consider how that data contributes and fold into what eventually becomes, right, Multnomah County leading causes of death. You have the power to rethink and redo your work to really shift, address, and eliminate disparities. And it's great to hear from Ryan, who I know is going to be coming after, to share how they've been able to sustain 0 traffic fatalities. I'm just like, that's amazing. It's, seriously. Unfortunately, we're a year where we're turning on the news every day and we hear traffic fatalities constantly and consistently. And I want to encourage you that while it might seem dire in this moment, it's possible. It's possible that the intentional decisions that we choose to make and how we decide to move forward and what looks different. And as I prepare to close, one thing I always say that I'm humbled to do the work that I'm doing, and part of what inspires me to do it every day is realizing that I have the power to make a difference so that my current child now, who is 14 years old, who is a young Black boy, can safely move in the streets of Portland and in Oregon without fear of what that movement is. And I think as we talk about traffic, I think it's also just to note and recognize that movement matters. When we went to release our Reach Traffic Safety Report, that was delayed because of COVID. The day that we released it fell on the date of Ahmaud Arbery anniversary, his death anniversary. I say that to say because as public health professionals and all of us as professionals, there are things that happen both on the local and national level that impacts our decision. For me, beyond this being a profession, it's also very, very personal. And I've shared when I started what active transportation was. I have a young son, and I cannot lie nor pretend to you the fear and anxiety that I feel to this day, as I encourage him to get on his bike to simply go bike riding. And unfortunately, every day we hear stories that remind us of what it means to be Black, to take up space in public spaces. So again, you have the power as transportation, decision makers and advocates to know that the decisions you're making to make the movement of cars can also benefit how people move within our built environment. We know that the improvement that we make within the traffic planning efforts also benefits where we see data around violence prevention as well. So in closing, I encourage you to leverage and tap into your power to change and make a difference so that we can all thrive and move safely and equitably. And thank you. Is the video gonna prime? I can keep going with Ryan's intro. Oh, it is? No video yet, okay. So I'm gonna transition and introduce our colleague, Ryan. So Ryan Sharp is a licensed professional planner and currently serves as the Director of Transportation and Parking for the city of Hoboken. He is responsible for the safe, equitable, and efficient operation of their surface transportation system. Ryan oversees the award-winning Complete Streets and Vision Zero programs, which have received national attention after 6 consecutive years without a traffic death. Yes. Should I say that again? So Ryan oversees the award-winning Complete Streets and Vision Zero programs, which have received national attention after 6 consecutive years without a traffic death. Ryan is also responsible for their shared mobility programs and green transportation initiatives, such as bike share, car share, local public transit, and the build-out of New Jersey's largest public on-street EV charging network. Ryan also oversees their parking utility, which generates over 20 million in revenue per year, and is responsible for curb management, maintenance, and operation of municipal management, maintenance, and operations of their parking garage and lots, permit parking, and more. Without further ado, welcome Ryan to the stage.
Morning, everyone. I might just kind of walk around on stage a little bit, if that's okay. All right, cool. Thank you for the introduction, Charlene. I appreciate it. And good morning to everyone. Thank you all for coming out here today to be a part of this session. And thank you to the Street Trust, not just for inviting me to come out here and speak to you all today, but for the fantastic work that you all do as an organization promoting and advocating for active transportation that's safe and equitable for everyone. And you've been doing it for a long time, and it's my first time in Portland, actually, my first time in Oregon. So this was like a pilgrimage for me in a lot of ways, where I had a chance to come out and explore and see firsthand a lot of the great work that has come from that advocacy over decades. And that work inspired me early in my career when I was in college in Miami, or when I moved to Hoboken and I began my transportation planning career there. So I'll get more to that in a few minutes. But I wanted to start there, and then the sun's out. I've been tracking the weather remotely here for about 3 weeks now, and it was looking a little dicey. I was trying to figure out, should I bring a raincoat? I was like, yes, raincoat, check, okay. A little umbrella that will fit in my luggage. And then I was like, maybe a large umbrella, one of those golf ones. Can I fit that in? So then I was pleasantly surprised that the day I arrived, I think a couple days, I've been here for a few days now, that the sun came out. So you're welcome for that, thank you. Well, I looked at the forecast. I have to leave later today, unfortunately, but it looks like you're in good shape for the foreseeable future. So, yeah, congrats. I joke, but anyway, how many people here are familiar with Hoboken, New Jersey? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have been to Hoboken? Okay, all right. I'm always surprised whenever I meet new people or travel new places, how many people have actually been to Hoboken. It's a very small city, which I'll get to in a moment, but it has like an outsized influence, I guess, in terms of, I guess its impact. Let's see if I can figure out how to use this. So if you're not familiar with Hoboken, I'm briefly going to walk through a little bit about Hoboken, so you're more familiar. It's a city of about 60,000 people located in the west side of the Hudson River, which is directly across from Manhattan. So it's right there near New York City. It's known as the sixth borough of New York oftentimes because it's very closely and intricately connected to New York by public transportation. There's a subway system that connects in with New York, ferries, the Holland Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel. Hoboken's right between both of them, two of the busiest tunnels in the country. So we have that connection with New York City. We're in the heart of the New York metropolitan area. It's a fairly youthful population. About half the population is in that kind of millennial demographic, 18 to 34 years old. And it's definitely a public transportation and walking city first and foremost. Pre-COVID, about 60% of workers commuted by public transportation, mostly to New York. And that's because Hoboken has subway, light rail, commuter rail, ferry, bike share, taxi, a regional bus terminal. Like every form of public transportation you can think of, Hoboken has it. It's a very walkable pre-industrial city. And it's the birthplace of Frank Sinatra and the birthplace of baseball, just in case you wanted to know. Here's Hoboken from a bird's eye view, looking from roughly over Lower Manhattan. There's Frank on the left, on the waterfront, and one of my favorite murals here on the right. And Hoboken's known for having great waterfront parks, right? If you ever visit Hoboken, you'll see there are a bunch of them. Many of them are repurposed piers from the days that Hoboken was a big shipbuilding community. And these piers have been repurposed from shipbuilding operations into public parks that jut out into the Hudson River. So you get these fantastic views of the river and the New York City skyline. And they're a great draw for tourism from around the country and really around the world. This is Pier C Park on the left. It's a bean-shaped park. It's got a little playground, beautiful views. On the right here, that's Maxwell Place Park. There's a kayak boat launch there. You can actually kayak into the Hudson River. So it's a really cool, unique experience there. On the bottom left, we have Pier A Park. I don't know why we name our parks after letters. There's one thing Hoboken's not good at, it's naming public property. We have one building called the Multi-Service Center, which is very creative. We have a couple new parks. One's called Northwest Park. One's Southwest Park. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. They're fantastic parks, but we need some work there. This is the waterfront during a snowstorm. I know, I just like that picture. Hoboken has a lot of open streets events throughout the year. Some are planned, some kind of just emerge naturally. On the left here, it's kind of hard to see, it's a little dark, but that's Halloween. Hoboken is a regional destination in northern Jersey during Halloween. People literally will come to Hoboken from half an hour, 35, 45 minutes away just to trick or treat in Hoboken, and they take over the streets. It's really cool. This one neighborhood in northern Hoboken, you can see how many people are out there. We have to shut the streets down basically every Halloween. It becomes its own kind of informal open streets event. And people always are like, oh, I just can't understand why people want to come to Hoboken for trick-or-treating. I'm like, duh, it's the door density, right? People have figured out that they can get more candy quicker in a shorter period of time in Hoboken than they can a lot of other places because of the population density. On the right here, we have our Arts and Music Festival, which happens twice a year, attracts tens of thousands of people, very popular. This is Court Street here on the left, a historic street / alleyway that has been in a couple movies over the last few decades. And then on the right here, that's the intersection of 11th Street and Washington Street in Hoboken, allegedly where the first game of baseball was ever played before it was a street, the Elysian Fields in this area. So that's why you have the baseball diamond, or the home plate logo, I should say there. Sorry, baseball fans, I didn't want to offend you with the wrong terminology. So I imagine some of you are probably thinking like, okay, what's this guy from a small city in New Jersey coming out here to teach me, or what am I going to be able to share about Vision Zero or Complete Streets that you guys don't already know, you're not already doing, or haven't already done? You know, Portland has this fantastic legacy, and other cities too, Eugene and Corvallis, yep, have done a lot of great work with building out active transportation networks and supporting public transportation. And really, this region has been a leader for a very long time. And as I mentioned, inspired me early in my career to try to copy a lot of the things that have been happening here in the Portland region. And that's translated into Hoboken over the last decade plus. And I'll circle back to that later. But today, what I'm going to talk about is Hoboken's journey getting to 0 traffic deaths over a 13-year period. And we've now been in this period for 6+ years. So we've had some good press about that, and that's all wonderful and everything. But I really want to talk about the journey and share what I think is a relatable and replicable story with you that I hope won't bore you too much. So how do we get there? How do we get to 6+ years without a traffic death? And the first thing I'll say, and I'll be extremely humble about this, a lot of damn good fortune, right? No matter what we do as professionals or as advocates or as elected officials, there's always going to be things outside of our control, right? And so I think that we have to act deliberately in the measures that we take to try to improve the safety of our streets, the accessibility and the equity of our transportation systems. But there's also limits to that, and I think we have to acknowledge that and accept that as part of that process, so we're not too hard on ourselves and that we don't get down, because at the end of the day, how many deaths have been prevented that we'll never be able to know about because of the work that you guys have all been doing, the work that we've been advocating for collectively across the country. And I think that gets lost in the message with some of the more depressing data that's come out over the last few years. But for Hoboken in particular, we had to overcome a lot of challenges that were unique to Hoboken, but not entirely unique, right? So the 2000s were a really tough time period for Hoboken. There were corruption scandals that involved the mayor, as recently as 2009, was arrested only a couple months after being elected for accepting bribes. Then around the same time, the city's parking utility director went to prison for 7 years after stealing over $500,000 in quarters. Yeah. So you have a distrust in government that was pervasive at that point that had to be overcome. There was no Department of Transportation in Hoboken until 2009 either. I failed to mention that in my opening, but so no Department of Transportation as recent as 2009. No in-house engineer or engineering division, right? Now you're trying to overcome scandals like a mayor accepting bribes, a parking utility director stealing from the public. So you can imagine the kind of mood in the room, so to speak. And if that wasn't bad enough, the finances had been so mismanaged for so many years in Hoboken that around the same time all that other stuff I just mentioned happened, things got bad enough that the state of New Jersey had to appoint a fiscal monitor to take control of Hoboken's finances because Hoboken couldn't be trusted by the state of New Jersey to control its own finances. So from that point forward, for over a year, almost 2 years, Hoboken couldn't adopt a budget without approval by this one person. A purchase order couldn't get approved without approval by this one person from the state. So Hoboken didn't have control of its own finances. So with all that in mind, these are the challenges. That's the foundation that had to be overcome. So how does that happen? Well, it's a Herculean task, and it really started with the mayor that succeeded the one that was arrested for bribery in 2009, Mayor Dawn Zimmer. She served for 8 years in that capacity, and she was a parks advocate when she came into office, first and foremost, but she also was a bike rider, and she was an advocate for active transportation. And her first act as mayor, a small act, but was an executive order that allowed city employees to park their bicycles inside of City Hall, right? So that was a statement of intent from her, and it really set the foundation for the next 13 years. And for Mayor Bala, who succeeded her in 2018, is the current mayor and who has really championed Vision Zero during this kind of sustained period of time we've had with no traffic deaths. Mayor Zimmer launched the Department of Transportation in late 2009 for the first time, and that's where the goals were set to commit to building out safe, equitable, accessible, active transportation systems in Hoboken. So how do you start to do those things when you have no money, you're already a small city, people don't trust you, right? So overcoming all of that was going to be a huge challenge, and so we had to start small. And we knew that we had to use the basics, and we had to be efficient with everything we did. So that started with something very simple, and that's just asking the state for assistance through a grant program to do a bicycle and pedestrian master plan. That's where it all started. And this was the first opportunity that we had as a community to formalize a lot of these visions that were popular in the community, right? People wanted to have safer streets in Hoboken. They wanted to live in a place where their kids could walk to school safely or their friend's house. Hoboken has no school bus program, right? People walk their kids to school. They bike to school. So having safe routes to get there is fundamental and critical, right, to the way of life in Hoboken. So this was an opportunity to set these goals, these strategies, and really became the foundation for Hoboken's future Complete Streets and Vision Zero programs. So great, we have an action, or we have a bicycle and pedestrian plan, we have some momentum, but we still don't have a lot of money. And a lot of the things that are in that plan were things that hadn't happened in Hoboken before, like create a citywide bicycle network. Well, that's cool. Well, there are no bike lanes in Hoboken, right? How do we do that? Or launch a bike share program. Around the time of that plan, City Bike had just launched across the river in New York. They're having some troubles getting things up and running, but there was a sense that bike share was going to explode in the region, and it did, and that Hoboken should be a part of that, right? So how do you get the public to believe that we can launch a program like that when New York City was only just launching their own program, and all those other things that I mentioned a few slides ago were still in the mix, right? How are you going to pay for it? People are going to die in our streets, right? We don't even have a bike network yet. So we had to resort to pilot projects, and this is going to be nothing surprising to any of you, right? Pilot projects are used all over the country. I'm sure they've been used 1,000 times over here in the Portland region in particular. But they've been devastatingly effective in Hoboken for a very long time because they were a way to circumvent some of those challenges I mentioned before, right? A lack of resources, a lack of time, a lack of trust. Let's try it first. Let's do it in a low-cost, quick implementation manner, and let's see if it works. And that's so disarming to people who may have concerns that are valid from a variety of different perspectives. You may not believe that bike lanes are needed, right? You may not believe that you need to build out curb extensions to shorten a pedestrian crossing distance or make it easier for people of all ages and abilities to cross the street safely. You may not believe that we have the ability to even implement a project like that because of the distrust and so forth that had been permeating the community for some time. So let's try it. Let's see if it works, right? And if you're a proponent of these things, you get your foot in the door. You get a chance to actually try it. You get people to see it. And when the sky doesn't fall, you've got momentum that's almost irreversible, right? So just a few examples from the early years of kind of trying to build out these projects in Hoboken. Simple things like adding bike parking in the street next to our subway station, right? Just repurposing a little bit of space. Those bike racks were filled the first day, completely full. So once they were full, we knew the demand was there. They're never going away. So that proved that we needed a safe way to build safe connections to get to our subway station, right? Daylighting, one of the number one things that kind of Hoboken is known for, installing infrastructure near crosswalks to physically keep cars or other obstructions from blocking your cone of vision as you approach the intersection, right? So opening up those sight lines to protect pedestrians when they're trying to cross the street. So doing that with bike corrals, right? We copied that from Portland. Straight up. Exactly. We even borrowed, I reached out to someone and got the actual like standard detail for how, so that is a Portland success story right there for sure. A pilot bike share program. So on the left here, this is social bicycles, which became jump bikes, right? Then got taken over by Lime. But before they operated anywhere, they did a pilot in Hoboken. They were based out of Lower Manhattan. They wanted to try it out. We did a 25 bike, 5-station pilot bike share program. It doesn't get any smaller than that. Again, it was basically no cost to the city. And people were skeptical, but guess what? Our number one complaint, not enough bikes. Why can't I get a station near my street or my neighborhood? So that was successful. The sky didn't fall. Momentum was building. Okay, let's stripe some bike lanes in-house. We did it cost effectively with paint that was only going to last 6 to 9 months. Our stencils were a little bit off. You can see the helmeted bicycle symbol here has like a kind of a small head. The lines are a little wavy, but like whatever, we got it done. That was it. We had to do things cost effectively and efficiently, and that was what we just kept doing over time. There's Mayor Bala there when he was a city council member with his son on Sinatra Drive, scenic waterfront boulevard in Hoboken. There was parking on both sides of the street here, and this is like a 1,500-foot gap in Hoboken's kind of waterfront walkway and bikeway network. And people it's about a 4-foot sidewalk there. You can't really see it, but it's like a 4 or 5 foot sidewalk with utility poles and other things blocking the sidewalk. It attracts thousands of people a day, walking, biking, jogging, strolling, just enjoying the waterfront. So people had to walk out because of congestion and go in the oncoming travel lane next to parked cars with baby strollers, right? People are traveling down a hill there at 30 or 35 miles an hour, a foot or two away from people pushing baby strollers. So it wasn't good. So we did a weekend pilot during Earth Day a few years ago, and we just got rid of the parking for the weekend, and we put up a survey, and people got to just use it as a multi-use path, however they wanted to use it, right? It was only 9 feet of space, but it worked. And the survey overwhelmingly came back saying, yeah, we want to make this permanent, right? So another success story there, where just trying something that was unthinkable in a place like Hoboken, where people really, really value on-street parking, came out and said, you know what? I value that more, right? That's more important to me than a place to park my car. And that's a significant statement in a place like Hoboken, where parking is at a premium. On the right here, this is just a simple epoxied gravel curb extension, right? So you don't have to worry about modifying the curb line and drainage and relocating inlets and things like that. So that costs a fraction of what it would cost to do a bump out, but you get about 75% of the benefits, right? So another way to build momentum. Pilot mini roundabout, a pilot chicane. So we've got a lot of pilot projects. We're doing things on the cheap. We're starting to build some momentum, build trust that these things can happen, they can work, right? So how do we build these things now in a way where we can institutionalize them, right? We don't want to have to fight for every single improvement at every intersection, every time, right? That's not the most effective way to go about things. We want to have a policy and a program that can institutionalize these improvements. If I leave, if other people leave, if a new mayor comes in, we want to have a program here that's going to make this thing permanent and do it effectively and efficiently and cost effectively. And so that's where we launched a Complete Streets program, right? So it was one of the first in New Jersey at the time. It was passed in late 2010, implemented beginning early 2011. And the main part of the Complete Streets program is something that can be replicated in any city, and it's been by far the most effective tool we've used in Hoboken to make progress with complete streets and building out our active transportation networks. And that's taking our pavement management program, which again, every city in the country has in some form, and kind of turning that on its head a little bit. So instead of just having a capital program where you're ranking and scoring the streets that are prioritized for repaving based off of pavement condition, maybe traffic volumes, right? These things get fed into a model or a spreadsheet, and that's your capital program, right? We took that and we expanded upon that and said, okay, well, we're gonna rank the streets a little bit differently now. If it's a bike route or a future bike route, it gets a bonus point. Does the street go through a lower moderate income census block? Is public housing adjacent to that street? Okay, you get a bonus point. Is it a transit route? Is it adjacent to a park or a school or a senior building? You get a bonus point. So that helped prioritize streets a little bit differently that would make it to the top of the list and get prioritized in our capital program for our pavement management program. And then once those streets got ranked and selected, complete streets components were required, right? This was not something that, if we had extra money through a grant program, we would do, or we'd look into it. Maybe it's feasible, maybe not. The goal there was to make complete streets components as fundamental as a center line or an ADA ramp. These are core project components. And doing it like that gave us a chance to have a crack at implementing complete streets on every block in Hoboken over a certain period of time. It may take 2 decades to get to all of them, but we had a built-in way to do that, right? And that was the long game that we wanted to set up to institutionalize implementing complete streets improvements in Hoboken. Here's just a kind of few before and after pictures that show how simple this is, right? These are not hugely expensive improvements, before, after, just a buffered bike lane near a football stadium. This crossing here on the left, there was no crosswalk, but there's a bus stop right there that connects into our adjacent community of Jersey City. A lot of people ride that bus stop, and there's a turn there that's kind of blind, right? So we had to make that safer. There was a lot of close calls there. There were injuries, some of them serious. So a simple pedestrian island with RRFBs, done. This is River Street, commercial corridor, kind of closer to the waterfront. Terrible picture, sorry, but it's Google Maps Street View from like 2007. A little bit of striping, right? Okay, that's a better improvement. In this case, we've had a couple cracks at this intersection, so then we went a little bit better, right? We added a bump out when we had more money. Daylighting with vertical delineator posts, high visibility crosswalks. So you can just see how we've had 2 cracks at this, and we may not have had enough money or enough support to do everything we did the first time. But over time, we were able to layer in those improvements, and every time it gets a little bit better over time, a little bit safer, a little bit more accessible. This is by a school, before and after. Add the bike lane, the high visibility crosswalks, the painted bump out. This intersection connects a county park with our high school. Okay, let's add a raised intersection. Let's add some placemaking to it, right? Let's make it nice. This is all paid for, almost all of it, through funding that comes from the state of New Jersey's Transportation Trust Fund for roadway preservation. So no additional tax dollars are being spent for most of these projects I'm showing you here. This is a famous pizza spot in Hoboken, Grimaldi's. I'm sorry, Napoli's. I can't mess that up. Okay, it's fine. All right, it's better now. So we received a grant to implement curb extension rain gardens here. And then because it was improved and the streetscape started to look a little bit better, some artists decided they wanted to do a mural on the building. And now there's a parklet there you can see in that corner. So you can see the dramatic placemaking improvements that have come out of this project in particular. So it's not just about complete streets or improving safety. There's green infrastructure, there's art, there's placemaking, all of it is there. This is an intersection connecting an elementary school on the right, and the left is the waterfront walkway for the Hudson River. No traffic control through 15th Street, which has pretty high traffic volumes throughout the day, high density residential through here. A lot of complaints from people that nobody stops for them in the crosswalk, and people speed through there trying to get to the green light, which is just about 300 feet west of there. Okay, so we'll just narrow it down a little bit. Again, very simple. It's an island with RRFBs. So over time, Hoboken's finances start to improve. Public confidence has improved substantially. We are implementing these layered complete streets components into our pavement management program year over year over year, kind of that long game. Now it's time to start investing in our priority streets. Bigger investments on our bigger streets that carry higher traffic volumes, that have higher rates of injuries. These are streets that have had traffic deaths in recent years. So now that we have more funding available and more support to take these projects on, we started doing that. So this is Observer Highway, which is a minor arterial, or I guess you could call it a gateway collector road in southern Hoboken that connects Jersey City near the Holland Tunnel to the southern part of Hoboken. And this was the first road diet in New Jersey at the time in 2015 that had protected bike lanes. It was a 4-to-3 conversion. And again, for New Jersey or for Hoboken, this was a big deal at the time. So you can see before and after. I mean, you had to walk on the south side of the street in this little kind of median island that separated four lanes of traffic with a service road strictly for parking. That's it. It served no other purpose. A rail yard is just to the right of the cars on the right in the picture there on the left. People had to dodge signs, and it was not good. And then on the right, you can see how the bikeway and the brown path on the left of the screen is actually a pedestrian walkway. We didn't have enough money to build out a full curb and sidewalk the entire length of this corridor. So again, we had to find a way to do it. We just used EnduraBlend, and we striped a brown walkway. So just trying to find a way to get things done. We know it's going to work. Just find a way to do it. This is more Observer Highway. You can see how hostile it was across the street there at a busy intersection. After, much safer. So then there's Washington Street, which was built between 2017 and 2019, which really functions as the center of place for Hoboken. It's probably the primary retail corridor in the city. It's historic, tons of pedestrian volumes through there. There are more people who ride the bus here than car traffic. I think it's 15,000 bus trips per day versus 10,000 vehicles per day. So it gives you a sense of how things are operating here. And there had been a fatality fairly recently when this project was under design. 3rd and Washington Street, a senior was killed in the crosswalk. So we wanted to go big with this project. It was a $20 million project paid for partially through grant funding, partially through the program through the state of New Jersey, and partially through bond funding. It was that important to the city, and there were 16 new traffic signals, curb extension, rain gardens were built at every intersection, enhanced bus stops, underground. We improved our infrastructure with new water mains and a microgrid backbone for resiliency. And then there's these green bike lanes, right? Which they're nice, and there was no bike lanes before on Washington Street, so it's an improvement. But the plans had called for protected bike lanes. At the last minute, City Council decided that they're not going to support that. Everything else is fine in the project, but we're worried about how the business community is going to respond to not being able to have people double park anymore, right? We've all been there, right? So we said, okay, that's fine. We're going to put in these really bright green bike lanes. Then they're going to attract a lot of people to ride on the street. And we're going to do the best we can with curb management to make it as safe as possible. And if it works well, then great. That's a victory. If it doesn't work well, then we're going to have a huge new support or a huge new group of supporters, of advocates who have experienced that firsthand. And the next time that Washington Street is up for repaving, that support is probably going to be there because there's going to be an overwhelming amount of people that are going to be putting pressure on their elected officials to make that change, to correct what didn't happen the first time around. And that's already happening. There's already council members that voted against the protected bike lanes just a few years ago. They've now publicly come out in support of changing that the next time there's an opportunity, right? So these things can happen in phases. You may not always get everything you want the first time you redesign a street. And I know that can be painful, right? We all want to get everything we want. But if we build momentum and we can play that long game over time, good things can happen just continuing to build that momentum, right? Even in Europe, right? All these streets and all these cities that we constantly refer to as kind of being the best of the best around the world, it took them decades to get to that point, right? We will get there too someday. Just a few before and after, you can see how long the crossing distances are for pedestrians. Much shorter with the bike lanes. Yeah. So people would just stand out in the middle of the road waiting to cross. The signals were not timed for pedestrian convenience, very long 120-second cycles. 90 seconds of that was for cars. And then after, right? Streetscape improvement, shorter crossing distances, before and after. And of course, you build a nicer street that's more welcoming and more inviting, and more things start to come on top of that. So open streets started to happen on Washington Street where people felt comfortable kind of taking over the street and sitting out there for certain times of the day. There's a thriving parklet program now. Many of them are on Washington Street. I don't know if it would have worked as well previously now that the street has been calmed and it's a little bit narrower in terms of the travel lanes. And then there's the bike lanes that provide an extra buffer as well for the parklets. So another benefit. So I'm almost done, but Don Zimmer served as mayor through 2017. Then 2018, Ravi Bala is elected and he comes into office. He wants to shake things up a little bit. right? Complete streets is great, but after almost 10 years, it becomes more and more difficult to explain to people what is a complete street, right? Like what makes a street really complete? It's kind of wonky, and it's hard to get the community to kind of rally around that as a term, right? What's the benchmark? What's the end game when you have a complete streets program? Is it building out 100 miles of bike lanes? Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? For most people, I think that's difficult to understand. So we came up with a new approach, right? A more expansive approach. And that was just piggybacking on the Vision Zero program that had been increasing in momentum, and more communities were beginning to become Vision Zero communities across the country. And that was a natural next step for Hoboken, right? Let's go beyond complete streets. Let's go more comprehensive. And let's take on that safe systems approach, right? And not just chase the crashes. So Vision Zero was launched in Hoboken by executive order. There was a task force that was created. Oops, did I go back? Oh. The goal was to eliminate traffic deaths and injuries by 2030. Thankfully, we've got half of that done, but we still have a lot of work to do with injuries. Injuries have been relatively flat. They have gone down about 10%, which is good, I guess, in terms of trends elsewhere in New Jersey and elsewhere across the country, but just shows how difficult it is to make progress and how you really just have to keep pushing at it year after year, and how over time these improvements hopefully can chip away a few percentage points year over time. So the task force had a lot of common groups you would want to have in your Vision Zero task force: city staff, elected officials, public safety. One thing that we did here, though, that has been very helpful, that I'm not sure if you've done here in Portland or not, we actually have members of a Vision Zero task force in our neighboring community, Jersey City. We put them on our task force, and we serve on their task force. So we're trying to regionalize Vision Zero in our part of New Jersey and use our collective, our combined population, our combined influence to really work together on these regional challenges and regional solutions. Because really, if we all work together in a vacuum, right, on our own islands, we're less effective, we have less power than when we work together. So that's been very effective for us. Vision Zero action plan gets created. We're using the safe systems approach. 110 plus action items, and we're going to update it about every 5 years so that it remains modern and relevant, and the community can continue to feel invested in it, and that they have that buy-in, and that they have an opportunity to guide where Vision Zero is going. I mentioned it's based off the safe systems approach, so moving away from chasing crashes, right? Using data to try to reduce the number of crashes, and putting that responsibility more on individuals, and moving to that systems approach where we accept that people will make mistakes, crashes are inevitable, and so we have to implement strategies that will reduce the severity of those crashes that are going to happen, right? So that's kind of how we've shifted gears the last few years. And that starts with a citywide 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, right? We have to reduce speed. And we've been building complete streets for a number of years. The next step was to go to the regulatory side and now start to bring down the speed limit to match the slower design speeds that we've been building towards, right? So the goal here is to try to piece those two things together. So you have that systems level approach, and I think that's been helpful, slowing speeds down to trying to sustain the recent success that we've had. And then just a couple safe road projects as I'm wrapping up. This is Sinatra Drive. You can see on the left here, that's a proposed bikeway. This is going to be built sometime next year after going through a 1-year planning and engineering process. The bike lane that Mayor Bala was in with his son, that was that multi-use path, is now going to get upgraded to be a 2-way protected bikeway on the waterfront. So we weren't able to do it the first time around because we didn't have enough money to do it, or possibly support. We've now gotten to a place where overwhelmingly during this process, people supported keeping that bikeway long-term, and we actually used a creative strategy to get parking back on that side of the street, which probably helped as well. But you do what you have to do, right? So a little bit before and after, this is what it will look like. Actually using the median to plant another row of trees. So our waterfront advocacy community is very passionate about trying to build out shade trees along the waterfront, and the south waterfront in Hoboken has this already, and it's very beautiful. And that's where a lot of the tourism goes to currently. But the central part of the waterfront is barren. It's hot during the summer, and so this is an opportunity to create that streetscape improvement as well, and have that continuity of shade trees along the waterfront. Before and after. And this last one is an example of that regional cooperation and sharing that Vision Zero task force connection with Jersey City. So this street here, Henderson Street and Marion Boulevard, is Henderson Street in Hoboken and Marion Boulevard in Jersey City. This was a gap in our protected bike lane network between the two communities. And there's a lot of bike volumes that come through there. It's a connection to the Holland Tunnel, so a lot of car volumes coming through there. And this was something that was mentioned in our action plan. It was something mentioned in Jersey City's action plan. So having that collaboration together on our task forces put us in a position where we were able to move forward in this project and jointly work together on bridging that gap. And so we just did this with, we're calling it a quick build. It's a little bit more than a quick build. We implemented this bikeway in the fall of last year. And so now we have a protected bikeway connection from southern Jersey City along the Hudson River all the way to northern Hoboken. People can safely ride in protected bike lanes almost the entire way through there. So that's an example of how we've worked with other communities to advance Vision Zero in Hoboken as well. And I'm going to close on this. So after everything that I've talked about, overcoming those challenges, right? How does a small city with limited resources move forward and build all of that infrastructure, right? How do we make our streets safer and more accessible and more equitable when people don't trust you, right? Or how do we overcome financial challenges, right? From years of kind of financial mismanagement. So I would sum up our approach as calling it the Tim Duncan approach. How many people know or have heard of Tim Duncan, right? I mean, Portland's a basketball city. I think it's fair to say if you're a Blazers fan, then you probably don't like Tim Duncan because he's pretty much terrorized the Blazers for almost 20 years out in the Western Conference. But Tim Duncan came into the NBA and had a phenomenal career, but he's never been a flashy player, right? He didn't come in jumping over people like Michael Jordan. He didn't have a killer crossover dribble like Allen Iverson that kids wanted to copy. He didn't shoot 30-foot three-pointers like Steph Curry. He had a very basic approach. He had a bank shot that was his classic move, and he had good footwork. He basically took fundamentals that had been around in basketball for decades and decades and decades, and he mastered those fundamentals, and he used them throughout his career with tremendous success. Got 5 championships with the Spurs. Now he's in the Hall of Fame. And I'm not trying to say that we're in the Hall of Fame. What I'm trying to say is that using an approach focusing on the fundamentals, right? Focusing on the basics, the proven countermeasures that have been around for a long time, that are well established, doing those things cost effectively through pilot programs and building up from there and doing them over and over and over again efficiently and effectively and consistently over time can yield significantly positive results, even in a community that has its own challenges, right? So that's something I think is replicable, right? Not every community has to be the Michael Jordan of complete streets. We don't have to constantly reinvent everything. We just have to keep doing the things that work well. And that brings me back to Portland and how Portland is still having a tremendous impact on places across the country. Because like I said before, Portland inspired me early in my career to copy a lot of the great work that had been done here, the work that had been advocated for by the Street Trust for so long, right? So the work that you guys are doing has led to everything I just showed you in Hoboken for the last decade plus. And now communities are following Hoboken in New Jersey and in the Northeast. And so that's your legacy, right? So I know that there's been kind of a depressing tone the last few years. Crashes have gone up, deaths have gone up, injuries have gone up in this region. I know mode shares have gone down for bike riding and transit use, and it seems like everything is just so negative. But I can tell you this, that I've been here for a few days now, and you guys have been doing unbelievable work, whether it's advocacy or whether it's through your practice, for a long time, and you're still inspiring communities across the country that are a long way from the Pacific Northwest. So I think the future is bright. I just want to say that. So thank you.
You- How about now? There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan, so much. We'll, I think, both take one. Can we both take one? Yeah, great. We're going to spend about, you're going to sit down here with whichever one you like. Try it. It's good.
Good.
Great, so we're going to sit down for about 15 to 20 minutes. Sarah, is that about right? Great, great, great. I have to say, I find myself a little bit confused listening to your whole presentation, and as the project manager of your Vision Zero Action Plan, I was like, oh, he didn't even need that. So I really commend you for the ongoing work over time to explaining to us how small and steady steps throughout the whole implementation of the Complete Streets program have gotten you to a place where you're aligned with another program that could build on that and sustain it over time. So congratulations on your work.
Well, I failed to mention that Drew had a significant role in developing our action plan.
All him.
Yes.
And his people.
So as part of the development of our action plan, we hired NelsonNygaard, and Drew was instrumental in developing what I think is an award-winning plan, and that's the backbone of everything we do now for our Vision Zero program. So I was going to mention that, and I got
no worries at all.
I failed to mention
no worries at all. I really found
thank you
myself
again,
thinking this work that we did with you was
and yelling
like
about,
you had set
one of
a
our kids
very
got hit in the
full
crosswalk
table
across the
in order for us to
street.
come in
I
and do that
remember
work.
thinking,
The format
there's
for
no
this
possible
15 minutes
way
will
it
be
could
we'll
be
do
my
a little
kid
bit of
seeing
conversation
Jasmine
back and
lying
forth.
in
I
the
have some
crosswalk,
prepared questions, but I'm
and
using the prepared questions as a
easily
way
the
to
worst
give you
moment of
all
my
some
life,
time
but
to document any questions that
can't
came up
think
for
of
you
this
during the
moment.
course of Ryan's presentation. Don't be shy about those, because we're going to wrap up in time to give ourselves a break onto the next thing. So let me start with a couple, Ryan. And Sarah and Anuksha will be distributing and collecting comment index cards for your questions. Let's see, what shall I start with? Well, I'll start with this. There are a lot of people here representing communities that don't have strong programs in Complete Streets or might not have a Vision Zero action plan. You described how important the fundamentals have been over time in institutionalizing safety. For cities that haven't gotten there yet, what recommendations do you have for keeping policymakers aligned with prioritizing safety and rehabilitation projects and kind of withstanding the pressures of change being hard?
Yeah, I think when you're working with policymakers, elected officials, people like that, the most important thing to remember is that they're human, right? And there are things that they care about and that drive them, and I think it's important to try to figure out what those things are, right? And try to have that personal connection with them. Maybe it's public health that drives them. Maybe it's equity. Maybe it's safety, maybe it's climate. There are so many different potential ins, so to speak, with policymakers that can motivate them to take this action. And so figuring out what it is and trying to have those connections with them, I think is a great first step to building that trust and that motivation for them to support, committing to active transportation systems.
That is so great, thank you. Yeah, building on that, it seems like Hoboken's a little bit of a unicorn. I heard you say that people said they preferred bike lanes over parking. Did I hear correctly for one of your projects?
That was for one project.
Okay.
So every project is unique in every community, of course, right? Different neighborhoods are going to have different priorities, and Sinatra Drive for that project is a waterfront street, and so there's so many people that use the waterfront actively, right? Again, I mentioned they're walking, they're biking, they're strolling, they're not driving through there, and I think that was helpful in kind of getting people to support this change over time, and Not every project is going to be like that. And I think that's the most important thing, is figuring out for each individual project that context within the community, and working with people in that community to figure out kind of what their priorities are and how you can work with them to try to move the needle.
That's great. Building from that a little bit, and talking about those trade-offs, projects that I know in my work, I sometimes hear something like, "You're trying to take my car keys away." There's very us versus them conversation that can come out beyond the single. It can be generated from a single project like that. Have you had the experience of? Have you had that experience, like people thinking you're trying to take your car keys away?
Absolutely. There's this thing, if you Google Hoboken, you put a hashtag in Twitter, "war on cars," it'll probably pop up. Yeah, whenever you have a lot of action, a lot of implementation happening, people can see these things. It can feel over time like overwhelming to some folks. Like, wow, we had no bike lanes and all of a sudden we have a lot of them and a lot of people are riding. And now I have to be more careful when I'm driving, because when I make a right turn, I have to look out for people on a bike or a scooter. I didn't have to do that a few years ago, right? So it's registering in people's consciousness in ways that maybe it didn't before. And so, some people get used to that and they adapt and evolve. And others, change can be more difficult. And so Hoboken benefits from being a walkable, transit-oriented city already. So that culture is already kind of embedded into the fabric of the community. People walk everywhere, even if they drive, right? You're going to park your car probably on the street and you're going to walk to your final destination, right? Or same at your home. But you have to work with people and listen to them if they have concerns about transforming your street in a way that they feel may threaten how they get around. You can't be dismissive, right? That's never an effective strategy. And I learned that the hard way as an advocate before I got into this career when I was doing work in South Florida. It's easy to feel like that, but it's amazing what happens when you really listen and engage people. And it may not always happen immediately that they start to think about things differently. But if you're personable and you listen and you really show that you care, because you do, I think that's when things start to change. It won't be for everybody, but you don't have to get everybody to support a project. You just need enough.
True. Are there any parts of this conversation that include your communicating how, walking and biking and safety investments are making it easier to get to your regional transit and local transit providers? And if so, what do you have ongoing partnerships with the New York City MTA or other regional transit providers to kind of help you prioritize what improvements would best serve them in providing better transportation options for people who might not be aligned there?
Right, so public transportation is very fragmented in the New York City metro area. There's 6 or 7 different major public transportation agencies across New York and New Jersey, which makes it difficult to have these partnerships. But we do work closely with the Port Authority. They operate the PATH subway, which I showed you a picture of earlier. It operates in Hoboken and connects into New York, and it connects out to Jersey City and to Newark. So we've worked with them over the years to build more bike parking around the subway station. We're working with them now to try to have better real-time transit information at the subway station. NJ Transit operates Hoboken Terminal. It's one of the largest multimodal transit hubs in the Northeast. And we work with them constantly on improving bus service. They piloted articulated buses, which hold more passengers, and they turn more effectively around tight intersection geometries. So they're very friendly for a lot of our reduced pedestrian crossing distance corners, right? I'll put it like that. So they've been great partners in that regard. So in terms of getting people to their infrastructure, it's been more on Hoboken, though, to try to figure out ways to safely get people there through our street network, through our bike network, through mobility programs, our bike share program. We did have a scooter share program for a period of time. So yeah.
We want to talk about the scooter share at the moment, because we're going to move on from that to this integrated approach that you're alluding to related to the safe system and all the programs that can be instrumental to creating a safety net for people should they be involved in crashes. How do we keep them from dying or having serious injury? This question builds on that concept of safe systems, and it's from our audience. The infrastructure is impressive in its impact on physical streets, but I'm curious about how you have tried to get at the cultural and social aspects of Vision Zero. What efforts have the city or advocates done to change the outlook of residents, visitors, and leaders? And I might expand on that to think about public health outcomes, criminal justice. Like, what more are you doing on the safety net?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the equity side of things is, a core part of our Vision Zero action plan. As part of Complete Streets for a long time, we've tried to change the framework from being very political, right, where people would pick and choose among council members and so forth, which streets should get prioritized. And in that sense, a lot of the influence went to parts of the city that had greater resources, unsurprisingly, right? Closer to our waterfront. So we've worked really hard to move away from that and try to use a more data-driven approach. And that was the way we've tried to address equity in a way that worked for Hoboken. So using data to say, okay, we need to pave this street because it goes through a community that has higher crashes, a greater history of injuries or deaths, or it's a low moderate income district, or it's adjacent to public housing, or whatever, all of these different metrics. So that data-driven approach has been a way to prioritize streets in those communities for improvements. And that's been the number one way that we've been able to do that, moving away from the political style of doing things in the past that disproportionately were benefiting people who had greater resources.
Perfect. This will be our last question, sadly. And I want to amplify what you said about your target. It's not only to eliminate fatalities, but also injuries over time. And this question is related to that statement, which you kind of said under your breath, just saying.
I'm ready for it.
Okay. Now that Hoboken has been able to achieve and sustain zero traffic deaths, how will you be framing or setting a next goal for your community to rally around?
That's a great question. So I'm going to answer that in two parts.
Please.
The first part is trying to sustain zero traffic deaths, right? Which is a different challenge that we weren't initially kind of prepared for, because we didn't think we were going to get there consistently, right? So there's a lot of pressure now to maintain that. And so on the one hand, it's doubling and tripling down on the strategies that have worked well for us, and also kind of what's next, right? It's a speed limit. It's trying to promote safer vehicles in our community. So it's really using the safe systems approach to try to sustain that. On the other hand, there is a lot of work to be done because our injuries have been more stubborn, and we're trying to continue to make progress there, right? We've only had about a 10% improvement since 2018, which is, again, better than a lot of other places, but it's not acceptable for our goals, right? So when we talk about Vision Zero and everything we're doing, it's now more of a focus on trying to reduce the numbers of injuries. And when we have conversations with the public on individual projects or council members or the mayor, that's always a key thing that we discuss now, that, hey, we have more work to do, because you don't want to get in a place where people are like, oh gosh, we're good, we're fine now. We don't need to do anything more. So we can't be in a position where we're resting on on the data, and we have to keep motivating people that there is more work to be done, because there is, and there always will be. That's the thing. So it's a little bit of a different position than some other communities, but I think that's something that is a top priority for us moving forward, is trying to bring those injuries down.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we really thank you for coming out and sharing your perspective on the long haul of this work. And really important for us that you were at such an integral part of this summit. I want to leave you with some advice about your next packing. Rain pants, no umbrellas.
Rain pants, okay. Thank you.